On the evening of October 30th, 1938, millions of Americans sat down after dinner, turned the knob on their radios, and did what they always did on Sunday nights. They listened. Radios weren't background noise back then. They were the heartbeat of the home. Families gathered around them the way we now gather around televisions or phones. The voice coming out of that wooden box mattered. It was trusted. It felt official. Real. At exactly 8 p.m., a calm, polite announcer introduced a program, a radio adaptation of a science fiction novel called The War of the Worlds. It sounded ordinary, harmless. Another drama, another story. Some listeners caught the introduction. Many didn't. They tuned in late, after switching stations or finishing chores, and they missed the one sentence that could have saved them from terror. What they heard instead was music. A pleasant orchestral tune filled the air, the kind you'd expect from a live broadcast at a fancy hotel ballroom. Nothing unusual. Nothing threatening. Just music flowing smoothly into living rooms across the country. Then, suddenly, the music stopped. A voice broke in. "We interrupt this program to bring you a special news bulletin." Those words carried weight in 1938. Interruptions meant emergencies, natural disasters, national crises. The announcer reported that astronomers had observed strange explosions on the surface of Mars. It sounded scientific, detached, serious. Most people shrugged it off. Astronomers discovering something odd wasn't exactly front-page panic material. The music returned. Then it stopped again. Another interruption. This time, a reporter was speaking from Grover's Mill, New Jersey. A strange object had fallen from the sky. A metallic cylinder. Crowds were gathering. Police were arriving. The reporter's voice shook just slightly, not enough to sound fake, but enough to sound human. Listeners leaned closer. The reporter described the object unscrewing itself. Something was coming out. A creature. Not human. Not animal. The words were careful, almost clinical, which made them more frightening. Then the screaming began. The reporter shouted that the creature was raising some kind of weapon. There was a hiss. A flash of heat. People were falling. The reporter's voice cut off mid-sentence. Dead air. For a moment, there was silence. Then a studio announcer came back on, sounding tense, trying to reassure listeners while clearly failing to reassure himself. He said communication with Grover's Mill had been lost. At that point, fear started crawling into homes across America. Phones began ringing. Neighbors called neighbors. People switched stations, only to find similar reports elsewhere, because many tuned back in at the worst possible moment. They didn't hear the opening disclaimer. They didn't hear that it was a play. What they heard was a series of increasingly terrifying news updates that followed the exact structure of real emergency broadcasts. Reports claimed the military had been mobilized. The National Guard was engaged. Tanks were rolling toward New Jersey. Poison gas was spreading. Cities were falling. The announcer spoke with authority, using familiar names, real locations, real military terminology. It sounded too real to doubt. Some listeners laughed it off at first, but others didn't. People packed their cars and fled. Families grabbed children, pets, whatever they could carry. Some headed for the countryside. Others tried to drive away from the East Coast entirely, convinced an invasion was spreading. Roads became jammed in certain areas. Gas stations were overwhelmed. Churches filled with people praying. In some towns, police stations were flooded with calls. Officers themselves were confused, trying to verify what they were hearing on the radio. Hospitals reported people coming in with shock, panic attacks, even injuries caused by frantic attempts to escape. One woman reportedly wrapped a wet towel around her face, believing it would protect her from Martian gas. Others sealed windows, hid in basements, or armed themselves with guns, ready to defend against creatures they couldn't even describe. The broadcast continued. The fictional news reports grew darker. The military failed. Cities were destroyed. New York was said to be under attack. The tone shifted from urgent to hopeless. A reporter described choking gas clouds rolling through the streets. His breathing became labored. He collapsed on air. Another voice took over, quieter now, resigned. He spoke as if humanity was losing, as if this was the end. For many listeners, this wasn't entertainment anymore. It was the apocalypse unfolding in real time. What made it worse was timing. This was 1938. The world was already on edge. War loomed in Europe. News of violence and invasion was not abstract. It was familiar. The idea of sudden attack felt plausible. People were trained by years of radio listening to trust the format. If it sounded like news, it must be news. Behind the scenes, the actors performing the broadcast had no idea what was happening outside the studio. They were simply doing their jobs, reading scripts, delivering lines. The man behind the production, a young and ambitious director named Orson Welles, was experimenting. He wanted realism. He wanted the show to feel alive. He got more than he ever expected. As the program neared its end, the format finally shifted. The story became more obviously fictional. A narrator spoke from the future, reflecting on humanity's survival. At the very end, Orson Welles himself addressed the audience, reminding them that it had all been a Halloween dramatization. For some listeners, relief washed over them. For others, the damage was already done. By the next morning, newspapers exploded with headlines. Radio play terrifies nation. Fake Martian invasion causes real panic. The press criticized the broadcast, accusing it of irresponsibility. Some reports exaggerated the chaos, but there was no denying that fear had spread far and wide. Lawsuits were threatened. Investigations were launched. Radio networks promised stricter rules. Broadcasters would never again blur the line between fiction and news so carelessly. Orson Welles became famous overnight. Some called him a genius. Others called him dangerous. He apologized publicly, claiming he never intended to scare anyone. He said he underestimated the power of radio and the trust people placed in it. But the truth was already clear. That night revealed something profound about human psychology. People didn't panic because they were stupid. They panicked because the information came from a trusted source, delivered in a familiar format during an anxious time. The broadcast hijacked the brain's instinct to believe authoritative voices, especially when those voices speak calmly while describing chaos. It was a lesson in media power. Decades later, the event would be studied in classrooms, cited in psychology books, and referenced whenever mass hysteria was discussed. The story evolved over time, sometimes exaggerated, sometimes simplified, but its core remained unchanged. A fictional story, told convincingly enough, had overridden logic. Even today, the echoes of that night still matter. Technology has changed, but the human brain hasn't. We still trust voices. We still react emotionally before thinking critically. We still spread fear faster than facts. In 1938, it was a radio. Today, it's a screen in your hand. The War of the Worlds radio panic wasn't just about aliens from Mars. It was about belief. About how easily reality can be bent when fear speaks with confidence. About how thin the line is between information and manipulation. On that October night, no Martians invaded Earth. But something else did. Fear, riding the airwaves, walked straight into millions of homes, and for one unforgettable moment, the world listened and believed. If this story made you pause, think, or send a chill down your spine, don't forget to like the video. Share it with someone who loves real stories that blur the line between reality and belief. And subscribe to the channel, because there are many more stories waiting to be told.